Now, let's dive deep into this big LGBTQ story for today. I'm Alex Morash, and let's queer up the USA View. Christian legal group accused of misusing research to defend conversion therapy before the Supreme Court. A conservative Christian legal organization is facing accusations of deception as it prepares to defend so-called conversion therapy before the U.S. Supreme Court. The Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, a group long known for challenging abortion rights and LGBTQ plus protections, will argue in Chiles v. Salazar that state bans on conversion therapy for minors should be struck down. But the researchers Lisa Diamond and Clifford Rosky, whose work the group cites, say ADF distorted their findings. Clifford Rosky, co-author of the 2016 study Misused by ADF, said, quote, "It's deceptive. Lawyers owe a duty of candor to the court. You cannot offer false evidence, and if you do so accidentally and find out, you have to correct that. They claim our work supports conversion therapy when our work clearly and specifically condemns conversion therapy on the same page they've cited," end quote. ADF quoted passages noting that, quote, "Sexual orientation changes for many people," end quote, but omitted the key point that such change, quote, "occurs outside the context of conversion therapy," end quote. The study actually concludes that conversion therapy is, quote, "not only ineffective, but psychologically damaging," end quote. Conversion therapy has been condemned by every major medical association and labeled a, quote, "serious threat to health" by the World Health Organization. Researchers Lisa Diamond and Rosky have filed a brief with the court to correct what they call, quote, "profound misrepresentations," end quote, Diamond said. Diamond stated, "That's what's diabolical about ADF, using me. They know they are misrepresenting my views. This case could do some real harm to the very individuals we've spent our lives trying to protect," end quote. Well, before we get into ADF, I want to make sure that when we're talking about research, these are two lawyers that did a piece in a law journal. So they're not specialists in that, and I think this is an important lesson for lawyers to remind them, no, you're not experts in everything. Maybe you should allow mental health professionals to be writing about queer identity in that way. As for the Alliance Defending Freedom, we always have to remember that this is a hate group designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center as such, specifically because their past president has claimed in books that gay men in colleges are going to sexually assault children and pedophilia, and that is a big woo-woo on the hate designation. They also have in the past defended criminalizing queer people. They're not a good group. Their work on this continues to be an awful attack on people. My advice, if the court does throw out banning conversion therapy, I think governors should just, make sure that if you do conversion therapy, you have to register your name, your face, treat you sort of like a sex offender in that way, that everyone can know who you are, and make sure that we can protest in front of your house.
Goodness.
You know what? It's scary to me because the court is leaning in that direction. And sure. I am worried that this is such an important law right now, and we need this. There are so many kids that go through this conversion therapy, and it distorts their reality. It ruins their lives. Parents that force their children to do it. I think it's one of the most horrific segments of our society, and anything that can hold up a law that stops people from following that course of action, I support, but I'm not optimistic.
It's such a nightmare, the violence of it all. And I have to say, living in Florida has often been, in smaller courts, we're seeing so many of these things happen earlier. In smaller courts, they've awarded conversion therapy, loosening of the laws and restrictions throughout, in places like Florida, but not uniquely so. To me, this is such an it's a nightmare of a story, to be so clear. Immutability is the word that's often used here, and it's not new to the field, and that is so even though they're lawyers, it's actually often used by psychotherapists, by historians, by social scientists, and it's often been really effective to protect trans people in certain cases, right? So that is the idea that gender identity could be immutable is really important for immigration cases, for people seeking asylum, for example. The question here is we've seen this kind of thing, if tracing back to the Kinsey reports, right? That is the idea that one could have same-sex attraction to one person and not to another, and that those things change possibly over time. doesn't change your sexuality, right? You could still, your same-sex attraction doesn't die, right? But really just kind of gets activated by different people and different connections. And this has been an argument over time, and whether it's validated or not valid. But immutability is kind of I think part of it is it's a dangerous word. Like it's an odd concept because it does help, if used by these, by right-wing entities, right? It can help understand to certain people that gay is a choice. And of course, this is also the Lady Gaga argument, born this way, and this biological determinism. There's this. It's a hard topic for some people to understand, and I think, unfortunately, these things can be instrumentalized for more violence.
No, well, that's sort of my problem with the lawyer. Like, it's one thing for mental health professionals, scientists who know what they're doing in their field to talk about these issues. Lawyers thinking that they can be experts enough to write about it. Of course, the ADF was going to look at it. They're lawyers too. Of course, they're going to look at law journals first, and to just wander in as they have been doing in this way. It's something I've seen from lawyers for years. As someone who's a political scientist and researcher, I have to deal with them constantly. I'm like, no, that's not how any of the math works. That's not how the budgets work. You don't know what you're doing. Go sit back and go back to teaching Parley Pro. But ADF also, they are trying to wipe away all rights for queer people.
Yeah.
They were very instrumental in reversing Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
When I was at the task force, the ACLU would put out internal documents to us about, the way the ADF has been going after queer rights in different ways. They're not just trying to take away our rights. Their end game on things like non-discrimination laws is to get all non-discrimination laws thrown.
Yeah.
They want to make this a white, Christian-only nation.
Yeah.
And you look at that and you think about yourself, this is a country where, we're giving a lot of people guns. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I don't have an opinion on that today. But, we're people that can very easily make rash actions that cannot be reversed. And people like this are trying to create a country where we can legally be very terrible to each other. And that just leads to a society that is not going to be safe for anyone. And I look at groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, and they're some of the most vile human beings I think this world has ever seen. And I think the LGBTQ rights world has never really stepped up to them as hard as they need to. We've always been way too kid gloves with these hate groups.
And I couldn't agree with you more. Well said. And I really struggle when I realize that the intended purpose of a lot of the words that were written in this particular case are being distorted.
Yeah.
And used against the intended purpose.
Yeah.
And that is scary when you have lawyers that can find those paragraphs, take those words, reframe the words to mean something totally different than their intended purpose.
Yeah. All right, y'all, that is another big LGBTQ story for today. There is no other queer nonprofit media platform like this in the entire world. Support our LGBTQ stories by subscribing and sharing Queer News Tonight.